Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the fourth plenary session of the Manama Dialogue. I would invite you all to take your seats and pay the fullest of attention to the excellent panel that we've assembled on the vital theme, new initiatives for regional peace. I don't think there are any new initiatives that are needed in terms of the long-term or even medium-term goal of a two-state solution. Equally, the goal of a Palestinian state under a unified and rejuvenated Palestinian Authority has wide, if not near unanimous agreement. Perhaps the initiatives that are needed relate to mounting the instruments to ensure an intense diplomatic battle rhythm to arrive at these two goals of a two-state solution with a Palestinian state under a unified and rejuvenated Palestinian Authority. And one issue to debate is whether this can be left just to the United States or just to the West or to large international institutions like the United Nations, the OIC, and the Arab League, all of whom have their vital and central place in this diplomacy. But perhaps at some moments, key states have to act in a particular way in order to ensure the foot is on the accelerator and not on the brake. And we have a perfect panel to discuss these issues, led by first, His Royal Highness Prince Turki Al Faisal Al Saud, who I always considered to be a partial co-author of the Manama Dialogue process since in 2003, when he was Ambassador to the United Kingdom, I consulted him on this particular ambition, and he gave me, as always, wise advice then. Dr. Ahmed Abu Al-Gait, the Secretary General of the League of Arab States, who last Monday was in Riyadh with 57 states discussing this very issue, and the Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, the Minister of State for the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia, in the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. I should say that we want to end this panel promptly at 16:45, but if you see Lord Ahmed leaving exactly at 16:40, it's not because he disagrees with anything that has been said, but because he has to catch a plane to engage in more regional diplomacy for the purposes that we've been all discussing. So with that, and a room attentive, Prince Turki, the floor is yours.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me extend my thanks and gratitude to the IISS for this kind invitation to join this discussion. My thanks also and gratitude go to His Majesty King Hamad and Crown Prince Salman for their invitation and their generosity in allowing me to come here and facilitating my arrival at this conference. Also, I take this opportunity to congratulate Dr. Bastian Giegerich on his new role as Director General and Chief Executive Officer of this esteemed institution. I wish him all the success in his new task, though assuming this role is not an easy job. After my friend John Shipman, John, by his determination and tireless efforts, has led IISS through the years to its international prominence, including in this region. Thank you, John, for all that you have done during your tenure in office. Ladies and gentlemen, ever since the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, every time a crisis or war erupts in our region, talks arise about the need to find a solution to the root causes of the issue at hand. However, all talk the talk, but do not walk the walk to the end. There was never a lack of ideas, statements, declarations, peace initiatives, United Nations Council resolutions, and General Assembly resolutions. Alas, all stopped at Israel's door due to the unwavering US and European backing. Therefore, all initiatives went in vain. Peace remained an elusive goal. The conflict did not begin on October 7th this year. There is a long history that led to today, most of it in the mode of assaults on Palestinians. The world is witnessing the failure in stopping this Israeli assault that amounts to genocide in Gaza and is also coupled with the threat of using nuclear weapons. And let me just make clear, as the Crown Prince said yesterday, I condemn Hamas's barbaric attack on civilians on October 7th. But I must also condemn the equally barbaric and more savage attack of the Israelis on Palestinian civilians, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. This war is a turning point in the process of a serious search for a just solution to the Palestinian issue that deals with the root causes of this protracted conflict. The Israeli nuclear threat is an open invitation to others in the region to pursue this option. We must ponder this recklessness on the part of Israel and not let it pass without reckoning. Ladies and gentlemen, this war is not only reminding us in this region of the hypocrisy and double standard of those claiming to be the guardians of what they call the rules-based international order, democracy, human rights, and international law, and other norms. They are reminding us of the lip services we were receiving through the years of their goodwill and their concern for peace and security in this important region. I remember last year on this podium, Mrs. von der Leyen stressing the collectivity of the security of the Arab region, or Gulf region, and Europe. And where do we stand on that today? I still don't know. But we must take this fact, and we also must consider that war is also an indication of political and diplomatic failure of the international community. All of us have failed in solving this problem, and the responsibility goes on all of us to find a solution. Continued failure in tackling this issue is unsustainable anymore, particularly when public opinion across the world is more conscious of the justice of the Palestinian cause and the atrocities of Israeli continued occupation. The Israeli, American, and European illusion that peace can be achieved by bettering Palestinians' life under occupation, normalizing relations with Arab states, or that Arabs and Muslims are fed up with this issue are not an alternative to all real peace requires and to avoid recycling this conflict every few years. Its continuation has been hampering all efforts in the region to move forward toward peace, stability, development, and prosperity during the last 7 decades. As I have said before, there is no lack of initiatives for regional and international peace efforts. However, what is more needed is working to implement UN Security Council resolutions concerning this issue and to impose their implementation as happened on Iraq and other countries. I do believe when it comes to the need for a new initiative for regional peace that the Kingdom initiated Arab Peace Initiative in 2002 is still on the table and is still the only initiative that reflects the norms and principles of international law, UN Security Council resolutions, and the need to tackle the root causes of this conflict. This initiative provides Israel with the recognition it desires from the Arab and Muslim world and countries. It makes normalization of relations between states a normal diplomatic conduct. It makes Israel an integral and normal state within the region. And above all, it brings justice to the Palestinians with their own state. Israel, unfortunately, has continued and still continues not to consider that option. It is obvious that without a just solution to this issue that takes into consideration the legitimate demand of the Palestinians for self-determination, this area will never experience stability and will remain exposed to all negative possibilities. If the issue today is Gaza, who knows where and when the next war will be. The hope is still there that after this disastrous war, the United States and its allies in Europe honor their commitment to solving this protracted conflict fairly by endorsing this initiative and work with Arab countries and Israel to bring this issue to rest. I would now like to refer just for a few minutes on what was said in previous sessions of this conference. There is a narrative that if Hamas releases the hostages, then we can move forward on humanitarian support and humanitarian pauses in the fighting. As I mentioned, this conflict did not begin on October 7th, 2023. So what about those Palestinians who have been incarcerated in Israeli jails before then, without due process and without legal recourse? What about their fate? Are they also going to be included in this quid pro quo? I hope they will be considered in that quid pro quo. The second point I would like to make is that the security question is lopsidedly weighted to Israel's favor. Who will guarantee the Palestinian people's security from Israeli aggression? There was mention of the International Peace Conference by Minister Zayani. That, as he said about another subject, should happen today, not tomorrow. And I hope that we take that seriously and go forward with it. There is also no mention of the day after, as there is about Gaza, about Israel. Is this government going to continue after the day after the fighting stops? You can imagine what's going to happen there. They're going to be even more awful, more right-wing, and more extremist than they are today. They've already talked about a nuclear devastation of Gaza. And ladies and gentlemen, there is one stigma that is used by Israel to cudgel the heads of those who call for holding Israel responsible for its barbaric and horrific acts. And that is the cudgel of anti-Semitism. I hope we can find a solution for that. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Your Royal Highness, thank you very much again for your wise words. Secretary General of the Arab League States, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, John, for the invitation. Actually, I do not have a draft text or a text to read from, since I was invited to participate in that panel only last night. So I will be talking to you out of my experience as an Egyptian diplomat who have been following this situation for so many years now. The fifth war or confrontation between the Israelis and Hamas in Gaza. That war, like any other war, it will have to come to an end. Wars, usually, when they end with the unconditional surrender of one party or a compromise between the two parties. In that particular war, the Israelis, I think, will try to apply the unconditional surrender. And that, I assure the world, as well as the presence here, will never happen. We have had a peace process in the region. And today, the title is New Initiatives for Regional Peace. There will not be a new initiative for regional peace. We have, and we have had, an offer to Israel, an Arab League offer to Israel, under the name, the Arab Peace Initiative. That was launched in 2002 in Beirut. it is principally it is land for peace. I would claim that it should have been land for peace and equal security for both. We have had an Oslo agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis, I think August or September 93. Both parties negotiated. And we were almost, I recall myself as foreign minister of Egypt, almost touching peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Then there has been a change of heart with the Israelis, as well as a reverse of course over the last 15 or 20 years. They were negotiating, aiming at the principle of two states living side by side in normal relations, as well as in economic cooperation. That changed over the last 15, 20 years with the rise of the Israeli rights. They torpedoed the Israelis that effort, and they opted, Israel, for taking and acquiring the whole of Palestine, at the same time imposing themselves on the Palestinians and considering them as second-rate people living in Israel or Palestine. The idea of Israel is to take the whole of Palestine. We have to understand that right now we have two people in the space between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. The crux of the matter, and sadly, I claim that none are tackling or addressing the real issue of the current situation right now. The current situation is a clear-cut manifestation of occupation and the continuation of occupation and the suppression of people to other people. The Palestinians today are almost 7 million in that space, and the Israelis are also 7 million. The Israelis, they think that they can impose themselves on the Palestinians eternally, and that situation of the status quo and occupation and the continuation of occupation will remain eternally. So as His Royal Highness said, and maybe Josep Borrell too, and many of the speakers, the issue is not the 7th of October, though the 7th of October was a horrific event. I personally condemn the killing of civilians. Of course, no one would accept the killing of civilians or taking hostages. But it didn't start, the whole situation didn't develop on the 7th of October. That is a situation that was initiated on the 5th of June 1967, with the Israelis taking over the territories and imposing themselves, and then negotiating with the Palestinians, aiming at building or accepting the idea of the two states living side by side, and then reversing course and deciding not to cooperate, and to impose themselves. So, versus occupation, you have something called, and I hope people still remember the Second World War and what was called then the resistance to occupation. We have an occupation in Palestine, and there is a resistance to the occupation. If you do not recognize this, okay, you have your own values, and we have our own values. I'm not addressing you, I'm addressing those who are saying it's wrong to resist. So I hope that the Israeli political class, as well as the Israeli society itself, comes to the sense that we live with the Palestinians, we allow them to emerge, we cannot impose our will on them, and we live side by side, hopefully in a larger space. In the absence of that, there will be the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th, and the 10th war. And we will keep going in rounds. If that happens, it's very unfortunate for the Middle East, as well as for the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you for providing the voice of long experience. Lord Ahmed.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Your Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. It's a pleasure to be back in Bahrain. Indeed, I was saying to our ambassador, and indeed Bahrain's excellent ambassador to London, Sheikh Fawaz, it, for me, over the last few years, has become a home away from home. According to my wife, it is my home, and I see her occasionally. But this is an incredible country, a country which has really demonstrated, as it's doing so again today, its convening power. Since then, since my last visit in Bahrain, the bilateral relationship has grown even stronger, including the visit that we celebrated of His Royal Highness Prince Salman's visit in July. And more recently, I'm proud to say that the two countries, the United Kingdom and Bahrain, have elevated our exchanges to our first strategic dialogue, which I had the honor to co-chair with my dear friend, His Excellency Dr. Al-Ziani in London. And may I therefore thank the Kingdom of Bahrain for hosting us today for another important and timely event. And I assure you the UK delegation here is in strengths. They say you normally have one Lord. I can certainly look across this room and see several more. Lord Sedwell, Lord Maud, as well as other parliamentarians and business leaders are here, demonstrating the United Kingdom's commitment to Bahrain, but also importantly, the region. Last year, when the then Foreign Secretary addressed you, he spoke in glowing terms about the transformation of the region, but also importantly of the threats that continue to face the region, indeed all of us. In this context, Bahrain has shown, under His Majesty's vision, continued leadership on peaceful coexistence and regional security. We have seen the benefit of the Gulf region's approach to foreign policy over the last year, including efforts to end the conflict in Sudan, hosting Ukrainian peace talks, and most recently, bringing the Arab world together in response to the crisis that we're all facing up to today in Israel, across Gaza, and the West Bank. These efforts have reconfirmed what we already knew, that you remain a vital partner now and for the future. And as we've heard from the Secretary General and His Royal Highness in his detailed sense of experience over the years, we together face a daunting set of challenges. And in this regard, let me be absolutely clear. We, the United Kingdom, remains a reliable and a committed partner for the region in responding to the challenges and availing the opportunities that lie in front of us. A partner working to constrain Iranian weapons proliferation and the destabilizing activity of Iran and its aligned groups that are responsible for much instability across the region and further afield. A partner also holding Tehran to account for its escalatory nuclear program. A partner working together with other key partners in the region for security and peace in Yemen, in Libya. A partner for prosperity with and between the nations of the Gulf. And a partner working to support this region's transition to net zero that will help avert the most disastrous impacts of climate change that threaten the Gulf, indeed the world. I say all of this because notwithstanding the importance and urgency and other challenges, it is natural, given the scale of the attack that occurred on Israel on the 7th of October, the scale and the suffering of innocent Palestinian civilians in the weeks since, that we are still seeing today, that our focus is on this region, on Gaza, on the occupied Palestinian territories, and the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians. This ongoing conflict is not only a disaster for the region, it is a disaster for all of us. It is a disaster for our common humanity. The people of Gaza were already living under desperate conditions prior to this conflict. But now they are suffering more, without adequate food, water, and access to the most basic of services we all take for granted, and in constant fear of their own lives. They deserve better from all of us. And I agree with you, Your Royal Highness, it means a collective, collaborative effort. It's also a disaster for the region and the world because conflict stokes division. It's led to alarming spikes of anti-Semitism, of Islamophobia. And yes, that's impacted my own country, the United Kingdom. And therefore, if we do not work together, collectively, collaboratively, this conflict will spread. These aren't just words. These are alarming signals we are seeing. And we need to work together to stop this conflict from spreading. The regional and international fault lines we have worked so hard over many, many years to bridge will tragically reopen, and the progress I've spoken of will be undermined. Therefore, what to do? What should the international community be doing? Well, coming together, discussing, exchanging views, candid, open, public discussions, yes, but private diplomacy and exchanges as well. All focused that in the immediate term, we must stem the bloodshed and do all we can to provide aid and security as quickly as possible to all people. Let me be clear, the UK has been very clear on this, that Israel had the right to defend itself against Hamas, against the act of terrorism that took place on the 7th of October. Hamas, let us not forget, acted erroneously in the name of religion I follow, many of you follow in this room, but has nothing to do with religion. Hamas do not believe in peace. The horrific atrocities against many nationalities, not just Israelis, also took the lives of the Jewish community in Israel, but there were a number of other faiths, including Muslims as well. Therefore, Hamas poses an immediate threat to many, indeed to us all. It itself has insisted it will repeat such atrocities. And, of course, an ultimate aim of ending the state of Israel. Therefore, it's our collective interest that the kind of abhorrent events we saw on the 7th of October, the terrorism we see around the world, indeed the United Kingdom itself has been impacted by indiscriminate terrorism, that we work collectively to ensure these events do not happen. But the UK has equally been clear that in defending such a right, Israel must respect international humanitarian law and take every possible step to minimize harm to civilians. Israel is a country, is a nation with obligations to international law. This also includes respecting the sanctity of hospitals so that doctors, who do an incredible job as we're seeing for ourselves, can continue to care for the ill, the injured, the sick. And the situation in much of Gaza now, particularly in hospitals as well, such as Al-Shifa, where tragically, young, innocent children, babies have died as a result of lack of electricity, has become acute. Too many people, too many innocent children, too many babies, too many lives lost. Every life matters, irrespective of Israeli or Palestinian, Jewish, Muslim, or Christian. Every life matters. Humanity matters. And that is why the UK, led by the Prime Minister, has been engaged widely with our friends and allies and partners in this region, including many of you here, and importantly, with the incredible aid agencies, including the United Nations, to get life-saving aid to those in Gaza. And let us pay tribute to those brave workers from the UN and other agencies who continue to work in conflict-affected zones. We have more than doubled our support to the people of Gaza, committing over £30 million, and we continue to support through NGOs as well. We are looking constructively at what can be done immediately. We believe that land borders present the best option, getting support where it's most needed. And we have been urging the Israeli government to allow for more access, not just through Rafah, but to open up the Kerem Shalom crossing as well. We have consistently called for those spaces to be created for the delivery of unhindered and sustainable humanitarian aid through pauses. Those spaces need to be created now to allow for aid to be delivered. The 4-hour pauses we have seen in northern Gaza are a first but initial step only. We need longer corridors, time, across all of Gaza if we are to deliver what is needed. And we need a collective effort to get this done. On Wednesday, the UN Security Council called, and I quote, for urgent extended humanitarian pauses for sufficient number of days to allow for aid access. And we must work towards this end. And as we've heard time and time again from this platform during the course of our deliberations, yes, we must work together for a durable, long-term, two-state solution, but it must not be paper-based. The time has come for action. We need to pull out the stops now. The time is critical to act. The UK believes that lasting peace can only be achieved through that two-state solution, not as a vision, but as a reality. We agreed that Gaza at the G7 and with other countries, the steps were laid out by Secretary Blinken, and we stand by those. Not a path that exists only in principle or in the minds of diplomats or officials, but, as we've seen today, not again a cycle of repeated resolutions that make too little difference on the ground. We need a real pathway, a pathway to peace, a pathway which is real, to restore hope in the future for all the peoples of the region, a hope, ladies and gentlemen, your excellencies, that has been lacking for too long. I end my comments with a quote many of you in this room will recognize. I know, Your Royal Highness, you will recognize it. Secretary General, you will recognize it. In 1994, the words were, there is only one radical means of sanctifying human lives. Not armored plating, not tanks, not planes, or concrete fortifications. The real radical solution is peace. The words of Yitzhak Rabin. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to comments and questions from the floor, but I hope also we'll turn to ideas from the floor. What is to be done? When? By who? How? There was a question this morning about the in-between time. Let's say there is a cessation of hostilities of some kind, and the aspiration of a two-state solution is still there. What is the work that needs to be done by who, how, and when in that in-between time to ensure the in-between time is short? We heard earlier this morning someone say that the mess in Gaza was something created by Israel, and it's not a mess that others should clean up. It's up to them to clean up. But if it's up to Israel to clean up that mess in Gaza, there might not be an outcome or a solution that the Arab states of the Middle East will have shaped, and it might not be one that comports with the values and aspirations that have been expressed here. There's been a call for an international peace conference, and I've heard a number of leaders endorse the idea of an international peace conference, but I have also heard a few leaders, both in public but a little bit more in private, saying they don't think the time is ripe for an international peace conference. So who should convene it, with what action at what point? And I thought there was some very interesting points made now about the need to communicate with Israeli civil society. Before October 7th, the biggest problem in Israel was the polarization of its own society and the concern of a majority of its population that it would become a theocratic state led by Jewish extremists. So there are many in Israel who have a concern about the way in which Israeli society was moving towards. And in this delicate time of transition, there will need to be a discourse not just to a government in Israel, but also to that wounded civil society that was already divided in Israel before the 7th of October. So the best ideas possible from all of you, and I'll ask first Basima Halawe-Rowe.
Thank you. My question for Prince Turkey. So last night, His Royal Highness Sheikh Salman bin Hamad talked about important fact many tend to ignore. That is the threat of another terrorist group, like what happened with Al-Qaeda or Daesh. And right now, we have the same threat that will result from the cycle of violence. You have hatred, you have revenge, you have extremism, not only among Israeli or among Palestinian, but also you see that wave of hatred and extremism targeting the moderate Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and UAE, just for saying their moderate position. My question, sir, you say there is no lack of initiative. Is there any initiative that address this destructive emotion? Violence breeds violence, but peace comes from within. Thank you.
Leila Moran.
Thank you very much. A theme across this dialogue has been on the importance of adherence to international humanitarian law. I think there is broad agreement that Hamas has undoubtedly breached it, and the UN, alongside other countries, have said that they're concerned Israel has too. But Israel doesn't recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. And in fact, Netanyahu has called these assertions, and I think I quote, hogwash. So if the mechanism to hold Israel and Hamas in particular accountable, if it's not the ICC, what is it?
Thank you. Bill Emmett.
Thank you, John, and thank you very much to all of the panel for some very, very thought-provoking remarks. I don't have an idea, but I do have an idea about what we need an idea about, which I think the Prince Turki and Mr. Elgate particularly focused helpfully on, which is the need for, in coming up with the initiative, to include security for both parties in as full a way as possible. So I'd like to ask you if you could help us by speaking a little further about how you see what sort of framework all of us can think about in how to implement an idea of adding equal security for both parties to the Arab Peace Initiative from 2002, and how, in doing so, we can all, and you can take account of the unavoidable question of Iran.
Thank you. Another voice of experience, Amr Musa. Go ahead. Amr, your microphone is on. You.
Well, okay, thank you very much.
But it won't
Well,
be on
I have
forever.
some ideas about this intervening period between now and the negotiations, or the time for all of us, together with the Palestinians and the Israelis, to sit and decide on the next phase of the Arab-Israeli or Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I suggest that in this intervening period, we have to call for elections in the Palestinian territories, West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. And also expecting that elections will take place also in Israel. Therefore, we have indeed, we'll be very busy. The Palestinians and the Israelis should be busy about that. So perhaps we have to call on part of the conclusions of this meeting that changes have to take place in both Israel and Palestine by way of elections. In particular, the elections in Palestine that Israel refused to allow. So this is only an idea about how to change the situation in both Israel and Palestine in preparation for a meaningful, within a reasonable time limit, agreed time limit, to the negotiating process that would lead to a better situation and the possibility of putting an end to this bloody conflict
Amr,
in
thank you
Palestine.
very much. Thank you so much. Fatma Alami from Oman.
Thank you. In Arabic we say أهل مكة أعلم بشعابها. The so-called superpowers have tried for decades to solve problems of this region. Most of these conflicts have been globalized and they have not been very successful. Do you believe that it is time for homegrown solutions to find its place by the current mid-powers in the region, from the region? And do you believe, if so, these initiatives by the mid-powers in the region will have the support of their friends internationally? The superpowers say that they are protecting their friends in the region. Do you believe that these friends, these super friends, will stand by you as medium powers in the region to accomplish your mission to come up with solution without intervening or hinder your efforts to find these homegrown solutions? If the main task is to stabilize the region and to find a safe path for international trade through this region, I think it is time now for these international powers to play the role of a support, not to intervene or to try to impose international solutions on our region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your intervention has inspired me to say two things, because I thought it was splendid. This is a region that has undergone the last decade or so what I style strategic self-determination. That is, 40 years ago, it was about political self-determination, gaining and asserting and maintaining independence as a matter of sovereignty. But strategic self-determination meant taking more autonomous charge of the direction of the nation and the region. And some of us have conjured with the idea that for this crisis, as for many decades ago, the Yugoslav crisis in Europe, perhaps a contact group needs to be formed of 5 or 6 of the regional states with the greatest variety of contacts and influence in the region to fast track a locally made solution. So thank you for inviting that thought, and perhaps some on the panel might wish to comment further on that. But for the moment, let's go to Saad Al-Khatani from Saudi Arabia.
Yes, thank you. They are talking about what Hamas did as if a new problem had emerged that had no historical ties. Mr. Ahmed, is not Hamas attack the result of the international community's failure to find a solution to the Palestinian problem? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Jordan, Awsal Waswaden.
I want to ask about the taking action and the two-state solution. The reality on the ground and the ideal that we're thinking about, there is a real discrepancy between them. And I'm thinking about how do you reach a two-state solution? Do you solve for the settlements? Are more than 500,000 settlers moving out of the West Bank? What if Hamas wins the election that we're calling for? And on another point, I want to ask about the growing idea in think tanks and academia of a one-state solution. I think that happened before in South Africa and Southern African countries. What do you think about that? Do you have any thoughts? Are we going to reach this stage in the next 2 decades if it wasn't solved through a two-state solution?
Thank you very much. And from Italy, Maria Fantappi.
Thank you. My question is for His Royal Highness Prince Turki. You rightly said that we should not condition ceasefire to hostage release, and the political solution should be discussed quickly, and not only for Gaza, but for the Palestinian issue as a whole. Can the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia lead an initiative on this, maybe in the framework of the international conference that you were mentioning? Can you lay out what could allow the Kingdom to lead this initiative, and how key will be the support of the US and other global powers like China for the Kingdom to lead this initiative? Thank you, sir.
And Barry Al-Mudin.
Thank you, John. My question is to Lord Ahmed. Thank you for the impassioned speech coming from the UK. Is quite interesting. My questions are two. One of them is, don't you think when our government calls for no ceasefire and then gets the parliament to vote on it for some more support, is actually sanctioning more killing of women and children in Gaza? No ceasefire, it means no killing. It's a very simple equation. And of course, Netanyahu has promised us a very long war. The second question, would you support our own Karim Khan in the International Criminal Court in pursuing taking both Hamas and Israel to court? Thank you.
And from the UK, Shahan Talabani.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Royal Highness and Your Excellencies. My question is actually more on the practicalities of this interim period that we've sort of referenced in Gaza. We're looking at sort of 500,000 to 1 million internally displaced people in Gaza, and I suppose the practical issue at hand is one of policing and security. And Your Royal Highness, you made reference to the need to ensure Palestinian security as well as Israeli in this context. So how do you all see, I suppose, a question and a sort of implied suggestion, regional states perhaps coming together to support what would look like a roadmap for the policing and security issue in this interim period in Gaza?
Thank you very much. And from Saudi Arabia, Al-Jawahara Abothin.
Thank you, John. My question for Secretary General of the Arab League. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has repeated its commitment to the Arab Peace Initiative, which aims to achieve comprehensive peace in the region. The Kingdom continues to work diligently and support efforts to achieve peace in the region. Therefore, after the passage of time since the initiative was first proposed, my question is, is the international community serious about adopting a unified stance to implement this initiative, which was designed to put an end to the ongoing conflict in the region? Thank you.
And from Kuwait, Sheikh Sabah Al-Sabah.
It's been said that the first casualty of war is the truth. And so my question is to you all, is how do we navigate this new information space where there are new communities of truth? And as His Royal Highness Prince Turki said, there are no heroes in this war, only victims. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mina Al-Arabi.
Thank you. My question is to Secretary General Ahmed Abul Ghait. After the summits in Saudi Arabia and the very specific points that were raised in the final communique, what are the steps that are being taken, especially as you have been given the important responsibility of following up and trying to bring not only an end to this war, but also a viable solution? So if you can talk us through some of the practical steps. I know some will not be for discussion publicly, but it would be good to get a sense of what is being done practically, because for a lot of people on the margins following this, there's a sense that not enough is being done. And I'd like to ask you also, please, regarding the humanitarian access. What can be done more to ensure immediate humanitarian access? Is this just with the Israelis, or can the Americans, the Brits, others do more to ensure, at the very least, some humanitarian support going in to help the Palestinians?
Thank you. And just some tactical warning for our panelists. I'm going to take a few more questions from the floor, and then when we get back to the panel, I'll ask Lord Ahmed to answer all the ones or the important ones addressed to him, so he gets the first crack, as he might need to leave just before the session is actually formally ending, then ask the Secretary General of the Arab League, and then we'll end with Prince Turki. So that gives you some chance to prepare your answers. Mohammed Darwish from Egypt.
Thank you. I just want to ask a question. When we're talking about a two-state solution, first of all, there has to be two states at the table. Right now, there isn't. There's an occupier and an occupied. And more importantly, Israel is not interested in talks right now. They have their own agenda that they're carrying out. So how do you bring them to the table? It's all fine and dandy for us to talk about initiatives for regional peace and drawing up ideas, but effectively speaking, how do you bring a country that is not respecting UN resolutions, International Court of Justice rulings, and so on and so forth to the table to discuss any possible solution to this issue and conflict? Thank you.
And Ina Rudolph.
Yes, thank you very much. My question is to His Royal Highness Prince Turki. So based on your experience, what would be a plausible scenario for post-war governance in Gaza? And secondly, how optimistic are you of Saudi Arabia and Iran reaching a shared understanding on how best to support Gaza stabilization, ideally under a unified Palestinian leadership? Thank you.
Khalid Juma from Bahrain.
After the intifadas of the past, there has generally been a restart in negotiations for peace, a seemingly never-ending cycle, as if Palestinians only deserve a peace process after some form of armed resistance is initiated. As part of the Manama Dialogue Young Leaders Program, I would like to ask all of you on the panel, equipped with your years of experience and diplomatic acumen, does the drive for peace now equal or dwarf what it was like after the intifadas of the past? Because when I asked the older generations back then, they had hope as well.
Thank you very much. One more, Sam Dagger from the US.
Thank you. A question for Prince Turki. Israel is saying it won't stop until it dismantles Hamas, and the US is saying Israel absolutely has the right to do so. My question is, what is your assessment of Iran's calculus in all of this? Will the proxies start attacking, for instance, Western interests in the region if this war goes on much longer? Thank you.
I can squeeze one more in. So Stephen Cullen of the US and the Wall Street Journal.
Thank you. A question for the Secretary General. The Arab League and a number of countries, including Egypt, have made it clear their strong opposition to any displacement of Palestinians outside of Gaza. But in the past month, we've seen a massive displacement inside of Gaza. And in the past week, we've seen indications that the million or so Palestinians that have moved to the south will next be moved to the west, to Mawasi, and potentially, into an increasingly smaller and smaller place, potentially out of Gaza. And so I wonder how Arab states, how the Arab League, your assessment of how Egypt would resist hundreds of thousands of Gazans heading towards the border, if for no other reason, for their own safety.
Thank you very much. So as I said, back to the panel, and you cannot answer every question that was posed, 2 or 3 that are most important, but where possible, offer some practical suggestions as to what needs to be done. Lord Ahmed first.
Well, first of all, thank you. Very wide-ranging questions and all very pertinent. Just some practical steps. I think one thing which needs to be very clear is the who. If not Hamas, then who? And for us, along with many other partners from the region and elsewhere, it's very clear that we need to now support the Palestinian Authority, both in terms of technical support, the releasing of financing so the Palestinian Authority doesn't collapse in the West Banks, because the highest risk of contagion right now is in the West Bank. And we need to ensure that countries like the UK, countries like the US and others who have influence over Israel make the point very plainly and simply about the need to curtail settler violence. And I can assure you we're doing just that. We also need to ensure there's a horizon here for the Palestinian people themselves about what comes next. And I assure you again, without going into details, we're engaging directly with various parts of the Palestinian leadership. There was a key point that you raised also about civil society, both within the Palestinian territories, but also Israel. We shouldn't forget 21% of the population of Israel is Israeli Arab. There are people of different faiths, so I also believe very strongly faith communities have an important pathway through track 2 diplomacy to also contribute to this. There were also important elements of building in structures on governance, and the answer is not readily available today. But I think we need to be thinking, as we look to bring this conflict to an end and ensure that people get the support they need in Gaza, that we are also looking and working back from a 2-state solution. This shouldn't be a vision 2, it should be a work back from the delivery of a 2-state solution and what blocks need to go into place now. Of course, we need the conflict to end. It's our belief that, yes, the issue of hostages is an important one, and we're focused on that to allow for that humanitarian space, because that's exactly what diplomacy focuses on, certainly from my experience, about creating those spaces where that arrangement, that consensus can be met. There were a few specific questions to me. First of all, just the general one, if I can take on the ICC. First and foremost, the ICC is independent. And anyone who knows the prosecutor knows he's both robust and equally proud of his independence. He has been to the region. He will make his assessments appropriately. And from our perspective in the UK, we're strong supporters of the ICC in terms of the international rule of law. One of my parliamentary contacts, Layla, asked about jurisdiction. That will be a matter for the courts. But it's important also to make the point that the international rules-based order, which was set up after the Second World War, was one to stop conflict, and where it couldn't stop conflict, to ensure that when that conflict was assessed, that where independent judiciaries and assessments were made, that people would be held accountable for that. There was a question, if I may, on the issue of regional support, this concept of a new core group of countries. You know, I am an optimist. There was a question made about hope in this really, really dark cloud. And just to be clear, yes, what happened on the 7th of October was a abhorrent terrorist attack against Israel, indiscriminate. But I also accept that there is a history to this conflict. You know, that's why we've been talking about different resolutions. That's why I quoted Yitzhak Rabin at the end of my speech, because this has been looked at before. Agreements have been reached, where the issue is one of delivery. And I do subscribe that we need our key regional partners here in this room to ensure that we help to deliver the outcome. This means that there are countries with existing peace agreements with Israel, namely Egypt and Jordan. We have 3 Abraham Accord countries who have signed agreements with Israel, and there are other countries, albeit through private diplomacy, engaged with Israel. It is in Israel's interests and in the region's interest, indeed all our interests, that agreements can be reached. But we are all accepting of the key principle that a solution can only be found once there is a realization of an independent state of Palestine next to secure and stable Israel. And I'd go one step further in terms of my own hope for the future, that ultimately conflicts of the past have shown and demonstrably shown that those who are the greatest foes, and the Second World War is a good learning from that, can become amongst the strongest partners. So ultimately, a vision of a shared economic prosperity for the region can be with an inclusive Israel to the region, but equally a viable, prosperous, progressing Palestinian state. And I think there needs to be an appeal put out by the Palestinians. I've said it to them directly. We've got a very rich international Palestinian diaspora, full of academics, of monetarists, of economists, of financiers. That is what's needed to provide that structure, the basis of good governance. And the United Kingdom, amongst others, stands ready to play its part on this core group of regional partners supported with key countries such as the US, ourselves, and the EU to ensure that we actually bring this about. And the final thing I'd say is the time window is short. I'm going to give you a personal anecdote about conflicts that happen. Children matter. I've got 3 of my own. My youngest is only 9. He knows what I do. As he was watching and listening, and we have these red boxes for ministers in the UK, he came into the study and he said, "Daddy, isn't it strange?" And I said, "What's strange?" He said, "Is the war in Ukraine still happening?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Why isn't anyone talking about it yet?" And that is why I make that point, that this time window we have is important. But you know what? The world is seized with this particular moment. I was looking at solutions for the 2-state solution in advance of the current events that we've seen. But the whole world, not just the region, not just Israelis and Palestinians, the whole world is looking at it, and I think we have a time window of opportunity. So let's make it count. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lord Ahmed. As I move across 4 minutes or so each to the distinguished gentleman to my right, but I might ask the Secretary General of the Arab League. There's been a couple of formal endorsements on this platform for an international peace conference, but I know 1 or 2 member states of the League of Arab States who are more skeptical about an international peace conference. Now, could you give us also a sense of the balance of opinion within the League of Arab States on that mechanism to accelerate a solution? Abu Ghait.
Yes. The idea of the international conference was aired by the Palestinians years and years ago. The Palestinian Authority is calling for an international conference. Then, after the Cairo Peace Conference, possibly this month or last month, the idea of an international conference was also put to the participants. Then comes the summit, the Islamic Arab Summit, and there is a reference there for the convening of an international conference to expedite the Palestinian settlement. I didn't notice any opposition to that particular issue. I didn't notice. On the contrary, there has been support. The international conference is not necessarily to take place up front of anything. It might come through the process itself. The international community would launch itself through the Security Council, through the United Nations. In that context, there could be an international conference to guarantee, to supervise, to ensure certain possibilities, the funds for the rebuilding, the assurances of security to both parties. So that is in relation to the international conference. There has been a question, after your permission, on the one state, if there won't be two-state solution, the one state. That will not be accepted by the Israelis whatsoever. So they reject both propositions. They reject the idea of two states living side by side and the idea of one state. Why is it so? Because if it is one state composed of two communities, equal communities, in 20 years or 30 years or even less, the Palestinian community will be larger than the Israeli community. So we might be seeing a Palestinian Israeli prime minister of that land. So the Israelis would never accept to be deprived by the Jewishness of the state. So it is put aside. What they want is to control the other side, the other community, and to have an apartheid state. And that will not live with all of us. There is a question addressed to me on the transfer of Palestinians from Gaza and maybe also from the West Bank. That, in order to be understood, is a recipe to create havoc in the Middle East, a recipe for a continuous instability and possibly military confrontations. Last week, the Jordanian Prime Minister said, you transfer by force or transfer the population, it is a declaration of war. It is a declaration of war. When it comes to the Egyptians, and I was foreign minister of Egypt for 7 years, you push them across the Palestinian borders into Egypt, they fire on Israel, and the Israelis will respond, and you will engage two armies. You will engage an Egyptian army and an Israeli army, and it is a cycle of continuous confrontation for another 100 years. The implementation of the two-state solution and why it didn't work. It didn't work because people were not serious. Everybody was saying, let's have two states living side by side, but no one worked for it. On the contrary, it was a lip service only. How to implement the resolutions of the last summit, the Islamic Arab Summit. In few days, the committee that was established during the summit from Arab as well as Muslim countries, a committee including the Secretary General of both organizations, will be visiting the capitals of the 5 permanent representatives, trying to convince them how to do it. The next maybe 96 hours or even less. How to press the Israelis, or how to press for more continuous inflow and flow of material into Gaza. It is in the hands of the Israelis, and it is the Americans who can tell them, allow this to happen, because the Americans have been standing with the Israelis over the last 40 days or so in a manner unprecedented. Maybe in 1973, when there was the October War, the Americans supported fully the Israelis this time too, so they can control them as they did at the time. The transition from a ceasefire to a breakthrough on the two states and the dynamics that will take place, that deserves that we all engage in discussions how to do it. But we have to do it as soon as possible because the situation cannot last for long. 2 million Palestinians right now, as I speak, are living in tents, and we don't know what will happen with them. The nature and the elements on one side, and the Israeli army on the other. Rain is destroying tents right now as I speak, and the Israeli army is approaching the south. So what to do? Ceasefire as soon as possible, cessation of hostilities as soon as possible in order to turn into what is really needed. What is really needed is a political will to settle the question.
Yes. Thank you very much. Prince Turki.
Thank you. Let me start by saying, without a sanctions regime, none of these things will work. If people can get away, or governments like Israel can get away with what they do and not be taken into account, then why should they do anything that meets the requirements of the international community? So before any steps can be taken, whether it is on the issues of two states or issue of elections or issue of security or whatever you want, humanitarian aid, etc., there is not going to be any success for that unless Israel can be sanctioned for not agreeing to the world community's requirements. We heard from the Americans, we heard from the Europeans, we heard from the Arabs and the Muslims, and everybody is talking of doing things, but no steps to implement what should be done. So that is, I think, a precondition for any effective means by which any meaningful resolution can be brought to the table. Now, on the issue of offshoots of Hamas, someone asked about that. Well, we've seen the progression, as the Crown Prince mentioned last night. There was Al-Qaeda, then the ISIS, then other offshoots of that, and now we're still having those offshoots operating. ISIS has not stopped, whether it is in Africa or in other places. So this is what is going to happen there. And if Israel thinks it can wipe out Hamas, I think they're mistaken, and tragically so, because the price for that is the killing of more civilians in Gaza and in the West Bank. When I talked about equal security for both, Mr. Emmett, I meant that. I meant there have to be guarantees by the world community, not just to Israel's security. And the equation is not also just considering Israeli security in return for Palestinian rights, etc. But that security has to be encompassing of the Palestinian people to prevent such attacks on them as is happening across the board now in both the West Bank and Gaza. One-state solution, I think the Secretary General mentioned it, and I don't need to refer to it. But another issue on governance for Hamas, for Gaza, and the others. I have been calling for many years that the Palestinians have to put their house in order. And the only thing that can happen there, I don't know if any of you remember, in 2006, Saudi Arabia brokered an agreement between then Hamas and Fatah in the holy city of Mecca. Unfortunately, Hamas abrogated that agreement. So the governance, I think, can be worked on by the important and existing international organizations like the United Nations and the OIC and the Arab League jointly to provide whatever is needed, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. And from there as well, I think the stumbling block has always been Israel's resistance to accepting anything from such organizations, particularly the United Nations. So if the 5 permanent members can put their teeth into measures to force on the Israelis acceptance of such activity by the United Nations, then I think we can reach some sensible arrangements there. But it has to have the wherewithal, the political will, as the Secretary General said, to implement what is said. The second intifada and the first intifada resulted in bloodshed. And I think if you all remember from a year ago, when the Israeli government began its assaults on Jerusalem and on other places in the West Bank, the arrest of Palestinians, the attacks on homes, the demolition of homes, etc., there was talk that there might be a third intifada. Well, the third intifada happened to be in Gaza, which was the Hamas attack on Israel. And so that is going to continue as an option. And I think, as I said, you have to deal with it with effective measures and not simply by talking about it. Iran proxies attacking Western interests. They've been doing that even before October 7th. And as we've seen since October 7th, both Hezbollah in Lebanon and even Khamenei and Abdullahian shying away from committing to helping, between quotation marks, Hamas in its defense against Israeli assault. So I don't expect that there will be any expansion of the role of Iran in supporting Hamas. They've already done their job. They've supported Hamas over the past few years. The irony here, of course, is that Israel has been supporting Hamas. Our neighboring state, Qatar, has been sending money to Gaza, and it was Israeli banks that was allowing that money to get to Hamas, without anybody accounting for that, where that money is going and who's going to receive it, etc., etc. So if you all are looking for someone to blame for what happened in Gaza, I think we can equally say that Israel is to blame for that. And particularly Mr. Netanyahu, in his arrogance and in his blindness to the reality, he thought that he was outsmarting everybody. So, alas, he's been proven wrong, and he's had his comeuppance. I just hope that the Israeli public will not put him back in office, or will not choose someone even more awful than he is if there is an election in Israel. And we still have to see and wait if there is going to be an election in Israel. These are, I think, the points that I would like to address in my answer to the various questions. Thank you very much.
Well, the spontaneous applause proves the wisdom of your remarks, the experience demonstrated by our Secretary General of the League of Arab States, and I hope also shows appreciation for our third plenary speaker, who was on his way to Doha, no doubt to discuss some of these issues.